So it's now 1:30 and the bike's still in a million bits. Not in a million bits, but in part. So I can't fix the problem. It must be a sensor or something stupid that electrics just, I've already said many times that I don't like them. So I've actually had to pull the R1 out the museum because I want to ride. Whilst it's raining, I'll use this opportunity to explain a little bit about what's happened. So at the Phillip Island episode, there was a problem with the bike and I thought it was the IMU. I still do think it is something to do with the IMU. I thought I'd fixed it, but maybe the IMU is damaged and it needs to be replaced, but I don't have a part available to replace it and try it. So I rode the first two races in yesterday's event in the dyno mode so that the lean angle of the bike wouldn't interfere with the electronics as it was. So then for the third race, I borrowed an IMU from another bike here at the track. And since I've done that, I cannot get the bike to start. So there's a fair bit of investigation and probably another whole episode based on what mistakes I've made, and I'll be happy to go over them when I find it. But there is another race on tonight, so I've dragged the R1 out of the museum, and I'll give a little bit of background on this machine. I rode this R1 or something like it, in 2015. At the end of that season, the bike that I raced got dismantled and most of the parts were returned to different suppliers. But the majority of the bike and equipment got sold to Tommy Hill, and he ran the ePay Me race team. And at the end of that season, he closed the race team up and stopped racing. And he sold this bike to a friend of mine, Dion Coote, who brought it to Australia. And I raced it in a wildcard race at Phillip Island in World Superbikes. And then after that, Dion went on to run the Honda racing team in Australia, the Penrite Honda racing team. And he had no longer a use for this R1, so I bought it off him, and I've had it ever since. And I've actually had a set of fairings repainted in the Milwaukee Yamaha championship winning colours to put on the bike. But at the moment it sits in the livery that I had for that wildcard at Phillip Island. It's probably been about 8 years since I raced it, just quickly thinking in my head, and probably about another 5 years since I've ridden it at all. So it is actually a museum piece, but if the rain stops, I'll take it for a ride and see how it goes. So if I draw attention to last year, particularly with the BMW, and I've explained this a few times to people, that bike was built, designed, from board meetings to drawing room to manufacturing. That bike was only ever designed to have electronics. Even the suspension is adjusted with electronics. So when you take it to British Superbikes, we run a Motec controlled ECU. Every single bike and team has the same one. It's a very basic system. There's no electronic controls or aids to make the bike work the way you can tune it with electronics. So the bike is already compromised before we even start, before we even roll out the pit lane. You're taking all the good stuff that the BMW technicians have worked so hard on to make that a good package, and you're taking all that away and then trying to ride a bike that's it's already been restricted before you start. So basically, for British Superbikes, you need a bike that has a really good platform and foundations to build from. And I feel like the BMW becomes strong when it's got all the electronics and that's the whole package together. As soon as you start taking bits away from it, it's not working as well. And I think Honda, maybe doesn't have a great reputation at the world superbikes at the moment, but I'm not racing it in world superbikes, I'm racing it in British superbikes. So Honda have always had a very versatile bike. It doesn't do anything really special in any particular area, but there's nowhere where it really performs badly. And if you take all the electronics off it, which we have to do again in BSB, the base package is still quite calm to ride and comfortable and user-friendly. So as a base unit, it's actually got good potential for our series. And in recent years, we've had a tyre change. For one example, we used to get 9 rear tyres for a weekend, and teams at the teams meeting, the complaints were we're spending too much money on tyres. So there was an agreement within the teams and the championship to drop back to 6. And they said, well, how can we make 6 work when we're just making it through a weekend with 9? And they said, well, if we put a harder tyre on the option as the option, it'll make the distance throughout the weekend. And as long as everybody's on the same, it's fair comparison. So now we've got to even, it starts to accelerate the problem even greater that I was speaking about with the BM. Not only does it not have great electronics that it's used to having, but we've also got a very hard tyre that doesn't create good grip. So, so you're not only struggling with a bike that's hard to accelerate off a turn already, and then you add a tyre that wants to spin more and doesn't give good feedback because it's more durable, it just makes the whole job that bit harder. So bikes particularly like, let's say the Ducati was really strong at times, like 2 years ago. It's not as strong as it was because of the tyre. The tyres affected the Ducati, and it's definitely affected the BMW, where bikes like the Honda, the Kawasaki and the Yamaha have actually bridged that gap a little bit, because the Yamaha doesn't have the outright speed of a BMW, but it corners really well and generates grip on the edge of the tyre. So where it loses out in one area, it gains back in another area. So the tyre has really changed the dynamics of which bike would you prefer to be on, because of that factor that we've always had no electronic aids. So I've sort of ended up on the Honda because I feel like for our series, it's actually it should be a good product. I mean, the proof is in the riding, but right now, sitting here, I've got good confidence that the base package that Honda have is more versatile for a championship structure like British Superbikes. So right now the track is live with my race, but I'm not in it because you can see the glisten off the ground. We have wet track conditions. So I didn't even bring wets intentionally. I decided well before this championship series started that if it was raining I wouldn't ride because of the risk, and it's obviously wet often in the UK, but at night under lights it really makes it difficult to read the ground and where the grip is or isn't, more importantly. So yeah, just sitting this race out. Hopefully the next 2 races there's a chance it might dry out for them, and we'll get back on track. So unfortunately the weather hasn't improved, it's actually got worse, so we've packed everything up. That is the end of the Summer Night Series, the end of racing, so no more racing activity unfortunately, but there is still more action to come because I need to get to the bottom of what's happened to this bike, and so stay tuned and I'll update you with what I find. So where I'm up to now is that I've got a bunch of parts sent to me from Alan Jackson from Jackson's Racing in the UK, and I'm going to fit some parts and try and eliminate where the problem is. I think the non-start problem is the cam position sensor. So I have a new one that I've just fitted, and it lives just here on top of the cam cover, and this pickup point here just sits above the camshaft, and as the camshaft's rotating, it's transmitting that information to the ECU. So the ECU knows exactly where the camshaft is in relation to the position of the crank and the rest of the engine operation. Okay, so somehow I've managed to cock that up. People, sometimes just basic things get overlooked.
Yeah, exactly that. Because it's just sometimes you can go, oh, maybe it's this, and then you go, oh no, that's a stupid idea, but it's not sometimes. So.
Yeah. So I've found the problem, and I can talk you through what's happened to get to this resolution point. So I think we need a recap. So I had a problem where the quick shifter and blipper stopped working at Phillip Island, and I thought the IMU was the cause of that because it was rubbing on the cover here. And then I cut a recess in the cover, and I thought that would resolve the problem, but it hadn't. So then I thought maybe damage had occurred to the IMU from vibration. So even though there's now a relief cut in the cover, the damage is already done. So when I was at Eastern Creek the last time, I was riding the bike in dyno mode so that the lean angle sensors and so on weren't active and wouldn't stop the bike from working fully. And then for the last race at Eastern Creek, I borrowed an IMU off another bike and put it on. And since then, I haven't been able to get the bike to start. So I didn't know if a sensor had failed or something had come as a result of swapping out the IMU. So what I've done so far is I changed the cam position sensor, I changed the crank sensor, I changed gear position sensor, blah, blah, blah. None of that fixed the problem. So I spoke to Mitch Reese, who runs a CBR 1000 in New Zealand. And during the conversation, talking to him about all what's been going on, we were talking about the IMU and which way it's fitted. And it turns out that I fitted it upside down. So that's why the bike wouldn't start. So I think everything up until the point where the bike wouldn't start was all true and correct. And then in my efforts to try and find a solution, I've, in a rush, fitted the IMU up the wrong way, and then have been chasing a problem, which obviously wasn't a problem. It was just something I had caused. So now I have a brand new IMU, which was in the package of stuff that came from Alan. And I have now since fitted it in the correct way, so the bike will start. So I'm thinking that everything has now been resolved. The original problem is possibly fixed from the fact that it's a new IMU, and the secondary problem is fixed because I've seen the error in my ways and corrected that. Now, I hope that's easy to understand, and I hope people can forgive me. We all make mistakes. I hope that hasn't brought a negative reflection on the Honda CBR 1000, because that's not what I set out to do. I wanted to, in fact, show the quality of the bike, not its downsides, but there aren't any downsides as it turns out, just me. So happy days.